All right, so really exciting project I just created. It's not completely done yet, but I just wanted to make some kind of a video and explain what we did. So basically, I created a Mailchimp. I connected to a Mailchimp API and I made a sign up form. So the sign up form was created using Tailwind CSS and some regular CSS. So I have all of the code here. So I basically made an app container. I used a div and I used some rounded corners for the rounded corners, background, the slate you're seeing. And then I got the gradient of the background. I got that from an external website. And basically, I just, went at it. One thing I had to do though, that I didn't really like, but I really don't know how to do this in Tailwind yet because I didn't really watch anything. I just looked through the documentation. I have some styles in here for like centering things and form inputs, these form inputs, form containers, the logo and whatnot. Maybe there's a better way to do this in Tailwind, but I didn't feel like watching a video on it and I just looked through some docs. So all of this is inside of a dist folder and I have my documentation here of what I just built, which is what I'm going to explain. My public files containing my HTML, my images, and my CSS. Another documentation file which can get deleted because I actually do not need that there. Let me make sure it's just that. And then we also just have our node modules. Of course, that's when we run npm, and then I'll explain my src. That's for our input CSS. This was created in the process of connecting Tailwind. And then our package.json is basically just my npm init, and some of my dependencies. So I'm using body parser, using express, of course, nodeman, of course, and then request. So something else here is that there's dev dependencies, and I think dev dependencies stands for what dependencies the developer that's building this was using. And then these are the dependencies that are required to load up this app. That's what I'm thinking, but maybe I'm wrong. And then of course we have auto prefixer, post CSS, and Tailwind. This was just when we are configuring Tailwind. We have a success page that we still have not implemented, and our output CSS. This is where all of our Tailwind styles are going into. And I just realized that it is doing it. I think it is media. Okay, so it's making my responsiveness for me when I write the Tailwind. I don't have to do all this media stuff, which is kind of nice. It's kind of nice. So our server JS, now I can explain this. So we're using a bunch of different things. First, we go ahead and we require our Express server. Next, we use our body parser, and that's so that we can grab the data that we're passing through these inputs. Finally, we're using the HTTPS module system. So this is from the Node.js HTTPS module, which gives us access to different built-in, I think you would call them functions. And it's also here on the Node documentation. So we can do some different things here. So if we require HTTP, and this is different from require HTTPS. One thing that I've noticed about Angela use course is that some of the stuff is a little bit outdated, but I mean, as long as we learn it. But as we see, we get to use the HTTPS. Um, I don't know if they're called methods. I guess methods. And this one creates a server, so create a local server to receive data from. So HTTPS or HTTP.create server. So next we went ahead and we created an instance, or not an instance, but we created our app, which is going to use the Express server, and we declared our port. And of course we are going on port 3000. So our port is 3000. And we used our body parser with URL encoded. URL encoded is basically the way we make body parser work, and it requires this extended true. Although our project isn't using it, it requires it. And I think, Angela, you explained that this is to grab like nested elements. And then finally, our CSS was not working, and this took me a really, really long time to fix. And what I was able to do was I was able to use app.use express static, and we went ahead and we gave the directory name and the dist. So that means everything in our dist folder, and that's why everything in the public HTML is in our dist folder. I didn't know if this was best practice, but it just worked that way. But everything in our dist folder will render up on the page. Finally, we can skip all of this and start from the beginning. So we listen for our port, which is 3000, and our callback function is basically going to say the app is listening on port 3000. Next, we use app.get, and app.get is basically going to take in the directory and going to respond with the file we want to load up when we go ahead and reference or listen for the port 3000. So when we go ahead and listen to port 3000 and we go to the home directory, we want to respond with a file that's going to take the directory name. So like /users and then my PC's name, and then it's going to go inside of the dist, inside of public, inside of HTML, and grab out our HTML file. So dist, public, HTML, and grab our HTML. And that is a pretty far path, but it was what worked. So we went ahead and we kept it. So after that, we went ahead and we got our HTML. Now we need to make the post request. So this is where our request or our body parser comes in handy. So when we pass information through these 3 input fields and we inspect it and go to our network tab, we basically see that we get, if it's going to load up for me, we basically see that we get form data. So the form data, it's not going to load up because I haven't put in any form data, and I don't want to just subscribe random people to my newsletter list because I don't know how to remove them yet. But basically, it's going to pass form data through our network tab. And with that form data, what we're actually able to do is put these into a variable. So I have first name, which is going to request the body f name. So it's going to request the body of the input field with the name of f name. And then our documentation, our last name is going to request L name, which here it's going to request the input L name body. And then finally, it's going to request our email, which is down here, the type of email, the name is email. So finally, if we go back here, we see that we have a data object. And this data object is basically, well, we could even take a step back. No, let's just go from here. So this data object is what we're going to pass through the monkey or the chimp mail API. So this members array of objects, if I can remember correctly, let me make sure I go here and look at it. So we basically create that members key inside of our data, and we are basically doing this to send our request to Mailchimp. So the directions are at this URL right here, and we want to create our data so that we can send it to them in JSON. So what JSON basically is JavaScript object. And basically we can create our JavaScript object inside of our data and then convert it into JSON. And that's what Mailchimp is going to get from us. So basically inside of here, we can create our members. And this is just the way of saying, okay, I want to take these members and I want to add them. And each member is an object. So each member, of course, is going to have the email address, which is the email address that we provided through the input form. And then the status, which is subscribed, because of course we want to subscribe them. And our merge field is going to take their personal information, or not personal information, but things like their first and last name, which we can get from first name and last name. And if we want to reference this real quick, we can go to Mailchimp and we can go, let me see if I can find this, settings, and we can go to our audience field merge tags. And what we see here is that we're actually getting these values from here. So first name, last name, and then the email, and the other email is in here, but I'd imagine it's the same way. Yeah, email over here. And we can change the names of these, and then we would have to change the names here, of course, but the best thing to do is just keep these the same and just use them inside of our merge fields. So next, what we basically want to do is go ahead and convert this data into JSON. So JSON stringify is going to convert the data into a JSON string. So basically take this entire object and compact it. Next, we want to go ahead and get our URL from the Mailchimp API. And it also lists it here. So this is the one that they listed me right here, api.mailchimp. And since we want to go ahead and add a new user, we can add our list, and then we add our audience ID. And since we can have more than one newsletter that we can sign our users up for, this audience ID is going to make sure that we sign them up for the right one. So another thing is that we want to replace this DC here with the name of the server or the number of the server that we're connected to. So as of Angela Yu's video, she said that there was 20 servers max, but now there seems to be a lot more servers because her video came out a while ago. So we went ahead and we added US 21 to the server here. And now our options is going to come from our response. So our response is basically going to make an HTTPS request, and this request should be in the documentation here. So HTTPS request, let's see if we can find it. If not, it's fine. Okay, so our HTTPS request is going to take in 3 arguments: our URL, our options, and our callback function. And this is basically what we're going to use to go ahead and send this data. So first, we take in the URL, the options, and then our response. And then we can call response.on. And basically what this is going to do is look for the data. And then within the callback function, it's going to console.log our data, but it's going to parse it into a JavaScript object. So this is basically the response that we're going to get. And we're basically going to convert this back to JSON data, or to JavaScript objects, sorry. And then basically we can go ahead and write the JSON data. And this is actually how we send this data to Mailchimp. So without the write in the end, we can't send this data to Mailchimp. And finally, we can go ahead and end. So this is letting our Express server know that, hey, we're going to go ahead and end this response, or we're going to go ahead and end this action. So hopefully I explained those parts right. I think I did. I think I explained it pretty well. And the final result is that when we go ahead and enter a first name, so if we say John Doe, and John Doe has an email address of johndoe@aol.net, and let's say he doesn't agree. If we click sign up, he has to agree to receive emails from the company. So you have to say, I agree to receive emails from your company. And once you do that, let's say he doesn't include his last name, it's going to ask him to include his last name. And same thing with email and name. So we can go ahead and sign up. And one thing we notice is here is that our data is still here. So that's what we're going to be working on next. We're actually going to make it take you to a success page to let you know, hey, you successfully signed up for the newsletter. And this right now is just a hanging, it's just loading forever. But if we go into our audience, we're going to see that we now should have 3 contacts. So now we have 3 contacts, and that's really, really cool. So this is being saved into Mailchimp's kind of like database, and we can see that John Doe has been added to our database and he's subscribed. And the source he was subscribed through was the API Zebra mailing list. And this is different because if we look at this first one, which is me, we see that I'm subscribed, but my source is admin ad. So I think it's just because I added it like this instead of through the API. And this is just letting me know who's signing up through my actual API request and who's signing up through me just putting them in. So that's a pretty cool feature to have. And I think that's about it. Okay, server just crashed. I think that's about it. Hopefully I explained that correctly, and I will be back to explain the success pages.